His name is Michael Sonnleitner. He has a Ph.D. in political science and has taught courses full-time in politics and peace and conflict studies, full-time at Portland Community College for 24 years, active with the Green Party. He has much experience as a community organizer and nonviolence trainer, and has been a military tax resistor for over 40 years. He's going to speak on the topic of militant pacifism, Gandhi, King, and the Occupy Wall Street movement. Michael Sonnleitner.
Thank you. And we have the reality that there is no such thing as a 5-minute break. And we also have the reality that when people talk a long time about academic things, you can lose half an audience. I'm happy that those of you who are here are still here. And my intent is not to be so academic, but rather to be more simple, because I'm tired. If you want me to be really complicated, have me for a morning class, okay? I'm best between 4 a.m. and about noon. So, let us look a little bit at Gandhi, King, and the Occupy Together movement. And I consider myself to be part of that movement. When it comes to comparing Gandhi and King, and these are specialty areas of mine, I'd like to bring them down to earth and say they have much in common, and yet they have nuances and disagreement. And those creative tensions between those two heroes of mine, Gandhi and King, do, I think, present opportunities for us to think and clarify our strategies. So what categories I'd like you to think about when I'm talking is, one, they have common kind of critiques of what is. They have common critical analysis. There's some disagreements, but common critical analysis. Second, they have an idea of goals and a vision, in other words, of where they intend to go, and they have similarities in that. And then they have strategies, and of course they both believe in nonviolent action, but they mean somewhat different things by nonviolent action. So first I'd like to be clear, and I'm going back away from you just because I'm hoping you can see me now, because I'm under the lights. And I'm not that pretty to look at, but, you know, I'd like to be able to deal with you personally and communicate with you personally. And if you can't see me, it's pretty bad. Critical analysis. Gandhi and King would very clearly agree with one another that there is a power elite. And the previous speakers have been giving you data about the power elite. If these two people were alive today, Gandhi and King would probably simplify things by saying, hey, look, you know, Forbes magazine suggests, as of last July, that there are approximately 1,120 billionaires in the world. We're not talking about 1%. We're talking about 0.0001. I mean, really out there. About 1,120 billionaires with a total net worth of about $2.4 trillion. Those are just numbers. But Gandhi and King would translate that by saying, that's about the total wealth of the poorest 3 billion people on the planet. 1,120 people, 3 billion people. The gap between rich and poor has never been greater. The pain of the poor, collectively, has never been greater. Those 3 billion people globally live on $2 a day or less. It's a type of poverty that mostly we have no concept of in the United States. We are, if not the 1%, we are the 5%. We are the 5%. We in the United States consume 30 to 40% of what the world produces. But the we in the United States is not all of us equally, is it? Because of those 1,120 billionaires, about 500 are in the United States. And those 500 billionaires in the United States have a collective wealth more than the poorest 50% of the U.S. population. So in a sense, the gap in the United States between rich and poor, and we're not talking the 1%, we're talking the extreme wealthy, super wealthy, and the rest of us, is a gap that has hardly ever been greater. And we reflect the world. That's why Occupy together means not just in the United States, but globally, and it has to be that way. Gandhi and King would see that. They would have that analysis. And they would also say to you, hey, when you start threatening those power structures, you can expect the instruments of violence to be used against you. Martin Luther King was very, very clear about saying that the rich, the powerful, will never voluntarily give up their power. And he structured his approach primarily to point at the power elite and say, how can we win power back from them? In a sense, they are the problem. So we need to tax them more, and so on. Gandhi had a very different approach. He said, yes, yes, the power elite are there, but they're not the problem. We are. Gandhi was prone to turn the searchlight inward and say, look, you are part of a system. You might complain about Warren Buffett, and yet you shop at Walmart. Walmart has the biggest lines on Black Friday, which was very aptly named, from my point of view, Black Friday. You know, we participate in the system, oftentimes that we criticize. Gandhi's attitude was, these people are not the problem. They have power only because we have surrendered it to them. They're not the problem, we are. The revolution of values that you want in your society, you have to have in your own heart and in your own practice. You need to change yourself first and then spread outwards. So you have a difference. You have a similar critical analysis. The gap between rich and poor is a major issue. And yet how to address it? Their analysis would say, King, we need to develop coercive force of numbers to physically seize the power away from those who will not yield it voluntarily. Gandhi is more like, we need to have the revolution, each of us individually. And the more numbers, the better, but ultimately, success does not depend upon the power of numbers. It depends upon the power of your spirit. It depends upon the quality of your commitment. And if you're willing to die for what you believe, you have a great deal more power than 100,000 people who are only satisfied to demonstrate without risk of arrest. So you have, it's not an either-or here. I agree with both men in their analysis. I think the elite are a problem. In a sense, they are justly criticized. And yet, Gandhi is also right, from my point of view, that we are also needing to be criticizing ourselves, especially if we want to be anything like Warren Buffett. In other words, we need to do more than simply change the person at the top. We need to change the system and be willing to not be part of that success definition of wealth. That's critical analysis. Now, what is their vision? So I'm going to go fast with 1, 2, 3. Vision. King had a vision of a beloved community, of course, where you would not be judged by the color of your skin or your sexual orientation or a number of other things. I'm updating King. I'm pretty sure that he would have evolved if he lived beyond 1968. But you would need to be by the quality of your character. You'd be judged by the quality of your character and the life that you live and how you share with your neighbors. Gandhi had a very similar vision, only he fleshed it out much more specifically. He had a vision of a goal of swadeshi. His economic goal of swadeshi was basically, yes, to start the revolution with yourself and live as you would have the entire world live. But then you move to your family, and you try to develop a family structure that is willing to live as you would have all families live. And you must be willing to sacrifice. The parent needs to be willing to sacrifice for the family needs to be willing to sacrifice for the village. We share with each other and building community along the way in an extremely grassroots, decentralized fashion. From swadeshi, you have not just self-rule yourself, but you want to have family rule. You have your family reflecting the values of the future, being the change that you want to see. Then you change your village, your neighborhood, and you restructure that. And you have your neighborhood living as you would have all neighborhoods throughout the world live. And that means, of course, consuming only your fair share of resources. And not asking the government to take care of the woman across the street who is senior and is not able to make her own meals. You should know your neighbors, and you should take care of that person as if they were a member of your family, because they are. It goes up. And from village rule, neighborhood rule, you need to evolve to national self-rule, swadeshi on the national level. Meaning that your country should be an example to the world, living as you would have other countries live. Not spending close to half of the world's military spending in your own country, spending almost as much as all other countries combined spend, but spend only proportional to what you might perceive to be your need for security. And that is a legitimate security, not defending your privilege, consuming 40% of what the world produces, but rather protecting your fair share. But your nation should be willing to sacrifice for the sake of the world, according to Gandhi. So if there is a famine in Somalia, if there is flooding in Pakistan, if Iran, perhaps ruled by militant Muslims, has an earthquake, we don't ask about ideology, we don't ask about religion, we simply do what is right. We treat others as we would have them treat us. And we provide aid. We develop a reputation of being the most generous country on the face of the planet. And that is true security. Not military might, but a good neighbor. And so Gandhi has, I think, a vision of decentralized democracy in the household, in the village, and ultimately in your country. He has a vision more like Vandana Shiva has these days in terms of earth democracy, which is living with nature, not exploiting it. No one has mentioned the connection between the Occupy movement and ecology, but I hope that it's obvious. The demonstrators that are in Durban, South Africa now, they are part of an attempt to reclaim the globe, to liberate us from the consequences of our own bad tendencies. And if we don't do it fast, all amount of success over corporate America might be for naught, because climate change is real, and I hope that we can avoid the catastrophes that science is showing us are very close on the horizon. In your lifetimes, upwards of 3 billion people could die through massive changes in weather patterns, flooding, drought. Lack of water is the big issue. Oil we're fighting over now, water we'll be fighting over 20 years from now. The next war between India and China is not going to be over resources that we now value, primarily energy resources. It will be over water. And so we need to have an expansive vision. And I think Gandhi and King both do that. They give us a vision of a beloved community where people are treating each other as they would want to be treated. And that means treating the wealthy as human beings in the family of humankind also. An us versus them attitude divides the human community. I think we need to be aware that, well, kind of like the earlier philosophical speaker was talking about, the master and the slave are both enslaved. Both the wealthy and the poor have serious consequences that are adverse to their humanity. Now, if you have a critical analysis and you have a vision, how do you get to the vision? What is your strategy? And yes, Gandhi and King both believe in nonviolent direct action. And rather than getting into a long discourse on what they mean by nonviolence, which I could do, put very simply, I would say King believes more in coercive force, numbers. He wants bodies moving, shutting down ports. And maybe he's right. And maybe our former speaker is right in terms of saying the rules need to be broken and you need to shake up the system and disrupt it. But Gandhi may also be right in saying, really, if you just stop there, all you have is a negative message. You're shutting down something. You're showing some physical force. And ultimately, your use of physical force can be met with superior physical force. Because those who are in power have the mechanisms of violence down pat. It can be a lot worse than pepper spray. And so from Gandhi's point of view, as you're trying to maybe shape the structure of society, you also need to shape the structure of your own personality. You need to say to yourself, I will change my lifestyle. Ultimately, I have to conquer my fears because the real enemy is not the 1%. The real enemy is my own fear of the consequences if I take a risk. The odd thing is, if you don't take a risk, not only will change be very slow in coming, but you might die. You might be among the 3 billion who die. And so ultimately, I would suggest we need to think in terms of ourselves and what we have to do to conquer our own fears. When you see the police coming towards you, decked out in their riot gear with their batons present and their mace and their pepper spray all ready, do you have the courage to stand? And rather than shouting slogans at them and seeking to make them defensive, you have the presence to stand and not be moved, to take their blows. I know that sounds tough. Jesus once said, what kind of love do you have if you only love those who love you back? You're talking to the choir. You're simply building community amongst yourselves. You're not expanding beyond. You need to also embrace the tax collectors. As a tax resistor of over 40 years, I seek to embrace the tax collectors. When they phone me with their threatening phone calls, we're going to garnish your wages, we're going to seize your bank account, oh yes, there will be interest and penalties, I'll say, all right, would you like to meet for lunch? I'd like to visit with you. I'd like you to understand why, as a matter of conscience, I am not going to feed the war machine. Why I'm hopeful that more people will do the simple task of withdrawing their cooperation from a corporate America that is an empire and that crushes many in its wake. You, the tax collector, I would like you to know that I care about you because you have a family too. And you're part of this system that is not of your making. You are part of the solution. The police are part of the solution. Even the 1% can be part of the solution. If we can make them conscious of us and what we stand for and touch their hearts so that they join us. At the point where police refuse to obey their orders, and there have been incidents of that in the movement this past fall, when that becomes widespread, the power structure is on the ropes and it's ready to collapse. We can help do it through disrupting the system, yes. And I'll be supportive of the Occupy the Ports. And I was supportive of singing Christmas carols to the sheriff of Multnomah County earlier this week, calling upon him to refuse to carry out orders evicting people from homes that have been foreclosed upon. I'll do those things. But ultimately, we need to take some risks as individuals. Risking arrest, it's not so bad. I mean, I've been arrested a few times. I have a lot of friends who have been arrested a lot more than I have. It's not a status thing. You shouldn't get ego involved in these things. But don't be ruled by fear. What's the tax man going to do? He could seize my house, so I'd lose a house. I could lose my house to fire before I get home today. There's a lot that's not in my control. I have enough people that I know. Kim, could I stay with you next week if my house burns down? Right? Edward? Do you have a couch that I could surf on? If we revise our security needs and understand that our true security is in community, then what do I have to fear from the tax man? Ultimately, what do I have to fear from prison? What do I have to fear about getting fired from my teaching job at BCC? If I'm controlled by my fears, I'm truly not free. And so, I'm not saying I'm a particularly courageous person. I fight my battles selectively. I have been fired from one teaching job. It would be nice not to be fired from another. But ultimately, those things are not in my control. What's in my control is acting so that I can sleep at night. And in good conscience. Yeah? That's what I'm trying to share with you. If we have that kind of spirit, yeah, it's really important to have the data with us and to have the strong rational arguments, but rational arguments are not going to win the day. Academics are not going to lead the revolution. The revolution of values that we're talking about here requires commitment. It will require us to be willing to suffer for what we believe. That will change hearts and minds. People will listen to facts as they care to, and the media can manipulate our actions according to the interests of whoever owns that particular broadcasting or radio station. They can make their choices. I don't think we should be changing our vision or our strategy to somehow play to them. Let us play to ourselves. Right? What do we agree on? We're not mushy. I mean, I've seen commonalities in this movement. I think we could generally agree on the 4 global green principles: decentralized democracy, ecology ethic, working with nature, not destroying it, social responsibility, acting in such a way that you do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And of course, we also have not just an ecological footprint, but a violence footprint. I think we could all agree on seeking to reduce our footprint of violence in this world, to make our actions and Occupy movement events as nonviolent as possible. And that's not just tactics, I hope, though I'm happy with tactics. I would like us to consider nonviolence more as a matter of principle. There's greater power, I believe, in actually thinking of the police officer as your brother or sister. Because body language, the smell you let off, the look in your eye, all is part of what might impact that person to not carry out their orders. Yelling at them, spitting at them, going limp and requiring them to throw out their backs when they arrest you, all of those things are maybe amusing tactics, and they might also satisfy you somehow. I'm getting some revenge here. But I don't think it's going to change hearts and minds. So I'm giving you my own personal view, but Gandhi and King live on in us. They have some disagreements, but we don't have to necessarily choose between the two of them. They both may have some truth. The elite are a problem. They may not yield without us forcing them to. And yet, at the same time, we are the problem, especially if we want to simply become a new elite. Then nothing has really changed. And so there needs to be a revolution of values as well as a revolution of culture. And I think we can do it. I have great faith in the human spirit. And I congratulate many of you who are taking risks far greater than I have thus far. This fall I've been too busy. It's an easy excuse, but it's true. I have responsibilities. I think it's important too that we not get puffed up about how much we have done. I come from a Christian background, even though I'm more Hindu now. But the point is, when Jesus said, everyone should give their widow's mite, if you're familiar with that at all, each of us should give till it hurts. Each of us should give as much as we can and then add a little. And for a single mother with 3 kids, she might not have the same resources, financial or energy-wise, or the freedom to get arrested. We shouldn't think the less of that person. Others who don't have the same constraints and responsibilities, they may be richer in their available energy and resources, and their widow's mite, their little piece of contribution, can be far greater. But the one person who can't give much but gives even a little bit more, I think deserves our, well, she's more revolutionary than someone who is free to go to jail and gets a 5-year sentence and gets all of our respect, gets our attendance at the meetings because they've been famous. Let us appreciate each other because we're part of that revolution. I'll just stop. If you have questions about Gandhi or King, as you like, I'll try to respond briefly because we have a couple of more speakers and I don't want to take too much time.
I'd like to know if you have any specific ideas about inviting the elite to co-creatively work with us, things we can do to actually approach them.
About me working with you?
No, the elite, the 1%.
Oh, all right. Well, first, while they may have common characteristics of being attached to their wealth, and it's very difficult for them to be free with their attachment, I think it's also possible to accept occasionally people as allies who are very strange bedfellows. Those who are willing to contribute without strings attached, those who are willing to speak at rallies in progressive ways, should be invited to do so, in my view, and allowed to be so. I'll give them an opening to be the liberated person that maybe they really want to be. You demonize them, you paint them into a corner, and they'll be defensive. On the other hand, it's a balance, isn't it? Because they have a lot to feel guilty about. They're part of the problem.
I agree. Furthermore, specifically, what about the people who are more intense in opposition among the 1%? How would we approach them?
I'm having a hard time hearing. More intense in...
How would you suggest approaching the more opposed 1% who are not willing to come down and participate at this time?
Respectfully. We don't have to be personal in our attacks. We have way too much of that in this culture. I can disagree with someone and say, like Gandhi did, writing to the Viceroy of India, the King's Vicar in India in 1930, "Dear friend," he wrote in his letter, "I pray for you to help me find a way out of the action that I intend to undertake." And Gandhi, in his letter, outlines how he was going to begin the Salt March. Told the Viceroy exactly when he was going to leave, when he was going to arrive at the then Indian Ocean, it's now the Arabian Sea, and break the salt tax by picking up a little bit of salt out of the ocean, a British monopoly on salt. Basically, Gandhi said, "Dear friend, help me find a way out of this. Any action does involve some violence. I'm trying to be as nonviolent and respectful of you as possible." He even takes it personally to the Viceroy. If you read that letter, it's remarkable. He points out, you will notice that the King of England, or actually the Prime Minister of England, has only, I think it's like 100 times more wealth than the average British citizen. And yet you, the Viceroy of India, you have 1,000 times more wealth than the average Indian citizen. I pray to you, my friend, to look at this contradiction and turn the searchlight inward. He says things like, I'm sure that you give most of your salary to charity. He's trying to encourage the Viceroy to be personally generous. And then he says, but I understand that my action is not against you personally, but a system, and this is where he kind of clinches it, a system which allows this inequality deserves to be summarily scrapped. So I'm going to, you can see the tone of his voice, I'm going to close down the British rule in India through massive civil disobedience. But don't take this personally, because it's not against you, Mr. Viceroy. It's not against you, the billionaires of India, or the princes of India. It's not against you personally, it's against a system. And I just love the words, deserves to be summarily scrapped. You can be radical without being personally offensive. And that same Viceroy would tell the next Viceroy who came in behind him, beware of Gandhi, beware of him. He'll get to you. He'll get to you. Because he is personally kind and consistently kind with every person who, opposes him. He'd give books to his jailers. He'd make sandals and give them away to the people who rested him. He'd do things of a personal nature to develop community with his opponents, while at the same time seeking to bring down the system that produces the poverty and the inequality that is a root cause of all of our problems. It can be done. If we work together and we don't live in fear, get rid of your fears, because that is the real enemy.
Any other questions?